Nazan, another
Yes.
question from me this time. This is Ruth speaking. There's a perception that Muslim-affiliated organizations are specifically targeted by the legislation. Have you found that this rings true?
First of all, absolutely, that's the perception. Um, Global, I mean, in our experience around the world, that is the perception. I think there are a few practical areas where we're going to see this being important. One, there's a considerable amount of anecdotal evidence that suggests that Muslim organizations, particularly those with some form of Muslim or Islam in their title, are experiencing significant impact of counterterrorism law in their financial activities. So what I mean by that is, let's say you're called Islam for Peace. You are based in the UK and you have operations, let's say, in 5 high-risk field environments. You are receiving donations in the UK, let's say from the government, population, and other places around the world, and then you are sending pockets of money to Somalia, Gaza, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and uh, let's say Philippines. You need to use wire transfers and banks in order to facilitate that, sending those funds, right? You're not sending money to people, but you're sending money to maybe your own branch organizations who will then pay salaries and fees and everything else. We've seen quite a bit of evidence that those transactions are either being blocked or slowed down. So banks are, of course, subject to all the counterterrorism laws that I talked about. And banks are very, very concerned about their risk exposure here. There were banks that were found to have facilitated Al-Qaeda transactions, unknowingly perhaps, but they didn't have the right systems in place. Right? So Islam for Peace suddenly finds itself either denied the transaction, so the bank says, sorry, you can't wire that money to Somalia. It's flagged off 3 of our most high-risk, indicators. Or they'll allow the wire transfer, but then it'll get stopped at some other bank in the process, sent back. There are fees, of course, being activated at all points where this is happening. And more Muslim organizations, humanitarian organizations, find themselves having to have all kinds of exceptionally complex transactions just to get money from point A to point B. So that's one. And that's serious, right? If you're talking about 3-4% coming off the top of your funding, that's not a minimal expense. That's not, we're seeing that Muslim organizations may simply be denied banking services altogether. So you may have banks, they're not just saying we won't wire the money to Somalia. You can't work with us. You can't, we will not have an account for you. You have no right to a banking service, right? It's not a human rights issue. They are a private entity that is allowed to say no. And those of you in the UK or who are watching this may have seen there was a big discussion with Barclays Bank over the question of remittances to Somalia and the facilitation of wire transfers there. Third, if we look at the prosecution records in the United States, it is certainly clear that the material support statute in the United States has been used by a huge majority against Muslim individuals and Muslim organizations. Now, let me put a huge, big caveat on that. These are not international humanitarian organizations. These are largely individuals and groups that did appear on the facts to actually want to provide support to Al-Qaeda or affiliated organizations, with one really important exception. The Holy Land Foundation, which was the largest Muslim charity organization in the United States, huge charity organization in the United States, was indeed, its 5 senior staff were prosecuted for violation of the criminal material support statute on the argument that their funds and support to a number of zakat committees, had ultimately provided financial support to Hamas. They were convicted. They are all in prison. And for many Muslims, and I think for many Muslim organizations, the specter of the Holy Land Foundation prosecution looms large. And they see that as indicating that it is deeply problematic when humanitarians say no one has ever been prosecuted. And then take umbrage at that suggestion, because they say, well, actually, there was a very serious prosecution. So is it discriminatory? I don't think we have evidence of that yet. Is it having a far more significant impact in a practical sense, in a day-to-day sense, on Muslim organizations? I think without a doubt the answer to that is yes.